Well, I brought a little prop from my refrigerator of my favorite beer, and I'm pretty excited to do this introduction of Paul Boissevain and Keweenaw Brewing Company. While originally from Northern California and with a master's in geophysics from the University of Arizona, Paul spent nearly 25 years raising two sons in Denver, Colorado, honing his camping and skiing skills, as well as acquiring a taste for craft beer. Paul spent his first career working as a geophysicist in the petroleum industry. With Amoco Production Company, Paul worked Wyoming, offshore Alaska, and Romania. Following BP's acquisition of Amoco in 1998, he went to work with Presco Weston, working southwest Kansas. During this time, he and Dick Gray broached the subject of opening a brewery in Houghton, Michigan. The rest is history, and cheers to KBC and Paul. Welcome.
Thank you. It's that easy, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Roxanne, for that introduction, and thank you, Operation Action UP, for the award and the honor of being here. We are Keweenaw Brewing Company. We've been in business since 2003, opened our first doors in 2004 at the tap room in Houghton. In 2007, we expanded 5 miles south to South Range, where we opened our production facility. Two owners, myself and Dick Gray. We met in the early 1990s over beer of all things when we were both working for Amoco Production Company in Denver. Dick and his wife had both graduated from Michigan Tech in 1982 and was with so many Tech alumni they dreamed of getting back to the Keweenaw at some point. In 2000, Dick and I were both working for a smaller company in Kansas. And 2003, he approached me with a proposition to open a brewery in Houghton, Michigan. His pitch was, Houghton is the best place to retire to in the world. They just don't have enough good beer up there. So at that point, my wife and I went up and spent a week in June in Houghton and promptly fell in love with that. The nature and the big lake. And in October, we bought a building to get started. And April the following year, we opened. So the facilities that we have in our taproom in Houghton, currently a 16-barrel brew house, 16-barrel fermenters, the same with a bright tank or conditioning tanks. So the process is you get the sugar from the barley, put it in the fermenter tank with the yeast, turns into beer, you put it in the conditioning tank, give it a little bit of time, and then it's good to drink. We have 3,400 square feet of tap room space, 1,000 square foot patio, 11 beers on tap and 2 separate bars in the tap room, and a 1,200 barrel capacity. This is the equipment we began with, and we thought 1,200 barrels would be adequate to get us through the first 5 years. That was what the business plan said. This is a photograph of one side of the tap room. We were trying to get a sort of historical, warm ambiance with that open-faced brick, copper, and barnwood siding. South Range. We have a 50-barrel brew house, 1,000 barrels of fermenter space, and 700 barrels of conditioning tank space, 2 canning machines, and 20,000 square feet, which doesn't give us nearly enough storage. So we're scrambling with that all the time. That forklift is constantly moving things for us. We have a 22,000 barrel capacity for annual production. Last year, we shipped 13,000 barrels, half of which were cans, half of kegs. So that those cans turned to 90,000 cases were shipped last year. In 2017, we were ranked in the top 10 breweries in Michigan by volume. We don't have statistics for 18, but I anticipate we're about the same because we're growing just like everybody else. This is our facility carved into the wetlands and forests of South Range, my home away from home. So one more historical point is when we were planning this in 2003 in Denver, Nick and I, while avid beer drinkers ourselves, knew that we didn't have the wherewithal to brew up here. So we tracked down our favorite brewer in Denver and lured him to the Keweenaw with a promise of a blank canvas, and with the only caveat that we wanted session beers, which to our mind were 4.5% to 5% alcohol beers, low in hops, so you could drink them all afternoon as opposed to sipping them all afternoon and still be able to drive home. So David joined us. 5 of the first 6 beers we put in cans were his recipes. They still represent over 80% of our sales. He left us 2007, 2008, and he's since opened a successful restaurant in Houghton, the Rodeo Mexican Kitchen. So he's settled into town, having a good time. We brought a couple of firsts with us when we came to the UP. First, we were the first microbrewery in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The breweries that were here at the time were all brew pubs. They could only sell their beer out of their taproom facilities, whereas we could distribute where we could find distribution. The closest microbreweries were one in Traverse City and one in Ashland, which really weren't coming into the UP, so we had a huge hometown advantage as we got started, though we didn't have the capacity to get across the UP at the time. The other thing that we brought was craft beer in cans to Michigan. While we were in Denver, there was a brewery, Oscar Blues, that was beginning to get cans out to the craft brew drinkers of the world. It was the outdoor environment in Colorado that got it started, and we felt that the Upper Peninsula had much the same to offer. We wanted our beer in the hands of the fishermen and the boaters and the campers up here. So we got a canning machine and we got started. And we were one of the first 50 brewers in the country to be doing this. At the time, there were a lot of naysayers and upturned noses at the thought of a craft beer in a can. But anybody that walks the beer aisle at Econo Foods these days will see that it's become a ubiquitous part of the craft beer industry. So let me jump into some of the statistics of how we got to where we are today. Retail sales, this was just at the tap room. What we do, you can see the first 3 years, pretty solid growth there, and we hit so we opened 2004, by mid-2005, we had hit our capacity with that 1,200 barrel system. So not a lot of growth after that. We did open the wholesale facility, and I'll show you that in just a second, but that flat retail sales line from 2007 on, it's a function of our population base. You know, there are not all that many people up there. When Walmart moved in around 2000, 2003, they did a study and figured that their Houghton store would draw in 50,000 people, and that's what we have to work with up there. So there's that, and just the floor space we have in the tap room. You know, most of the sales is Friday and Saturday night, and it's crowded. But we don't see a need to grow any bigger where we are there. Wholesale, on top of that, you can see the first couple of years the wholesale's pretty low, and that's a function of capacity. We had to keep the reins on our distributor in the Houghton area, Pisani Distributing. He wanted more beer, we couldn't give him more beer, and we were getting grumbling from our distributor down here at Pike that he wanted more. We'd say, you can have 10 cases this week. He'd send an order in for 20. And he has never stopped pushing us that way. So in 2007, when we opened the brewery in South Range, it just took off for us. So we've seen over 20% growth every year through 2014 after we'd opened. 2014, it flattened off. We attribute that to, 1, the explosion of breweries around the state, and 2, our complacency in not really putting new things on the market. So we sort of saturated the people that saw our beer and were drinking it. In 2017, we bought ourselves a labeler, which enabled us to put labels on cans. So we didn't have to get full orders of pre-printed cans, which they come in orders of 25 pallets at a time. And when we already had 6 different labels out there, that's a lot of floor space that we had to deal with. So by going to a labeler, we could cut back on the lesser selling beers and just put labels on those. We only had to keep boxes of labels around. Next, beer styles and cans. You can see we had 1 the first 3 years. That was our Pickaxe Blonde. When we opened South Range, we could expand the number of beers, and through That next decade, we didn't put too many more out there, and the ones we did put out there were not very big sellers. And then our jump in can styles going from 7 to 12 over the last 2 years are the seasonal beers that we've put out. Employees. So when we opened, we had 8 part-time bartenders and 1 brewer up there. Last year, we finished out the year with 29 employees. We had 3 full-time brewers, 4 full-time managers, 16 part-time bartenders. So over the years, we have had over it's 170 employees pass through our doors, 120 of which have been bartenders. Probably 90% of those have gone off with degrees from Finlandia or Michigan Tech. We have a couple of kids at Gogebic now going through. So we like to see those jobs are helping kids get out of school with less debt than they might otherwise have. Our regional sales. We are UP-centric in our sales. 50% of our sales is the UP, and that is Pisani in the western UP and Pike in the eastern UP. A little bit of Four Seasons along the south, and 1 downstate distributor up along the Sioux. So Michigan is 80% of our sales, Wisconsin 17%, but Wisconsin we're only down in the Fox River Valley. So it's fairly low. And in Michigan, where the buy local program really helped us a lot, and Wisconsin, it's worked against us there. We are not from Wisconsin, so people are not buying our beer first on the shelves. Beer styles. 3 of our beers, the Widowmaker, Pickaxe, and Red Jacket, are over 80% of our sales. We did not expect our Widowmaker to be that big. This Red Jacket Amber was our favorite when we left Denver. We thought that would be our flagship beer, and it's not. But we're okay because we have another one. So that's where we are today. Our future plans are to keep releasing 1 or 2 seasonal beers every year. Add employees as we can as we grow. We'd rather not add additional space and equipment because now we're encroaching on even more wetland, and that gets problematic. So that's what we're doing. The one last thing I'd like to say is that our Point Trail Ale has taken off for us. It's an IPA, and one of the things that we're doing there is $1 from every case sold is going to the Copper Harbor Trails Club to maintain and grow the mountain biking trails up there that are world-class biking trails. And one last thought, this is where I'm going when I'm done here. So if there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them. But again, thank you all for the award and the chance to be here.
Very good, Paul. I want to go where you're going when this is over, too.
I'll lead the way. Yeah. Roxanne, do I get this, or does it go back in your fridge? Okay, I do.
Well, and speaking of that, can you talk a little bit about the impact of the government shutdown? As I've understood it, the ability to get the tax stamps, I believe, that is required to sell your product could be a bit of an issue.
Well, that's not an issue for us because we have our tax stamp. We got that in 2003. That's just the license to operate as a brewer in the United States. The biggest problem is label approval. And so every label you see out there on beer cans, on wine bottles, on liquor bottles, has to be approved by the federal government. And that had been running at about a 2-week delay. You'd send the label in and be about 2 weeks to get it back. And so that stopped. So labels were not being processed. When they finally opened back up, it was a 2-month delay that they had. So they're still not quite caught up on that. For us, it wasn't a big deal. We had one can that we were going to put out that, we just held back for a few weeks. But for a lot of brewers that are running more just-in-time planning, you could either break the law and release it anyway in the hopes that you wouldn't get caught, or you wait. And so all of a sudden you have beer that's ready to go out, your label's not ready to go, and there you sit. And if you've got one of your tanks or 2 or 3 of your tanks full of beer that you can't do anything with, that shuts down production of everything else because that's clogs up the space of where you're moving your other beers.
May I assume that you don't have any trouble finding employees?
That is very safe to assume.
Okay, thank you.
I would say, so of all the bartenders we've had over the years, We've had 2 quit before they graduated. Our staff in South Range, again, it's very low turnover. We've got 1 out on maternity right now, and we've had 2 leave us to go off to brewing school downstate and in Chicago.
Any other questions?
My apologies to Carl's Cuisine that I was out on a conference call when you presented. But, of course, you're beholden to the 3-tier system. I'm sure you have other public policy issues, but the craft brewing industry has been kind of working around the edges, nipping away at that. Is that or anything else going on in Lansing a concern to you?
Lansing has actually done pretty well by the craft brew industry in the last 5 or 6 years. We've got a lobbyist that's working very closely with the legislature, and they've done a lot of things to streamline the application process, to cut out a lot of that archaic rules that had been there. So it's gotten a lot simpler in Michigan. Wisconsin's easier, but that's just a different state. The tax changes, we sort of have to see how that all plays out.
Why is Wisconsin easier?
The state laws on beer are much different in Wisconsin. For example, in Michigan, we're paying $6 a barrel in excise tax. In Wisconsin, we pay $1. Michigan, we have to go through the label approval process as well. Wisconsin, you don't. Michigan, when there's a beer festival outside of the Brewers Guild Festival, which is here every September, every other beer festival that's a fundraiser for somebody, I'm not allowed to stand there and serve my beer in Michigan. Wisconsin, I can. So there are little irritants like that, and it's, the hoops when you come in, so you jump through those hoops and you do your business. We're thrilled to be here. The UP drinks a lot of beer. So that makes up for a lot of the other nuisances that we have to put up with.
How do you deal with the whole drinking and driving thing with the tap room?
I lie awake at night. It's difficult. A lot of people don't show that they're drunk when they're having that last beer. A lot of people sit in the corner and their friends get them beers. You train your bartenders as best you can, and the state says, if you're doing your best, you're probably not at fault. So it's, for every bar owner out there, it's a risk that we take. So far, we've been lucky. And, the other thing is, I mentioned that session beers are what we like to make. So for the most part, our beers are low in alcohol. And we close early. We close at 10 or 11 at night. So we're not sending people out the door at 2 o'clock. So that helps us. The police like us. We haven't had any fights. But it's a different environment than a lot of bars. There are no pool tables, no dartboards, and it's a coffee house environment, is what I like to say.
Paul,
Is that-
for those of us,
Oh,
We have one back.
Thank you. So, Paul, can you share with us, since you started this business a while back and you've had a lot of experience, what is one thing that you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
built a bigger facility in South Range. No, honestly, it went very smoothly. Dick and I had the advantage of being trained by a big company in how to run things, how to project plan, how to budget, risk management, what are the financial costs of failure, things. So every step of the way, we were planning on what we could and couldn't do, and if we were taking a risk, we were looking at, what were the upsides, but what were the downsides as well. So I think we were very fortunate in that, our training kept a lot of that from happening. But it's, but then still getting into being just a small business in a small town, there are always more hoops to jump through that you don't always know about. Who should we have known before we started this sort of thing? But it's been, I think we settled in and we were very well accepted. So it's been good. So, nothing, really.
any other questions? If not, I have one last. For those of us that appreciate the product that you produce, and you look in your crystal ball, what can we expect to see in the future?
I think this summer we're going to put out a cherry wheat beer, and then we're looking at doing a session IPA, lot like Founders All Day IPA, that's a story in itself. I mean, Founders was a big brewery, they were doing really well, and then they came out with All Day IPA, and within 2 years that was more than 50% of their production. So it's, little things can make big changes. The right thing at the right time.
One question?
How do you come up with the names of your beers?
Over beer. So the names of our beers, we have tried to stick to historical things in the Keweenaw or the UP. If you look at our first 4 beers, Pickaxe Blonde is mining, Red Jacket Amber is mining, Widowmaker Black, Widowmaker is mining, Lift Bridge Brown, that's easy. So we try to keep the names centric to where we come from. Now, when they first come on, the way we come up with new beers is we try them at the tap room, and if people like them, then we'll see if we can duplicate them and see if people still like them. And they'll generally have different names. And so you get all this confusion. We change the name because we're going to distribute it now, and it's, well, what about that other beer? I like that better. It's the same beer. No, it's not.
Oh, Brett, I have to ask this because
Okay.
it's out there and I have to swing. How do you come up with your labels?
Okay, so my wife was the designer of the first 4 labels that we had, the Pickaxe, the Red Jacket, the original ones. We've changed. Can I back up? Okay, so the Red Jacket there is the Widowmaker, and the Pickaxe Blonde are there. Those are our new labels that just came out about a year ago. But the original ones were her design. After that, we had a local graphic artist working with Karen Olson, who won an award here last year, I believe.
Yes.
And now we're working with somebody at Homestead Graphics in Berga is doing our label design. So we come up with the concept and hand it off to an artist.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
No?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.